Let's be real. Fear is something we all face. It's woven into our lives like a thread we can't quite pull loose. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of losing control. It's always there, whispering lies, keeping us stuck, holding us back. But what if I told you that you don't have to live that way? That there's a way to surrender every fear you've ever known and experience a peace so profound it changes everything. That's what happens when we surrender our fears to God. Fear thrives in the unknown, doesn't it? It feeds on uncertainty, convincing us that we need to have everything figured out to feel safe. But let's break that down. Do we ever really have full control? We plan, we prepare, we do everything we can to create stability, yet life has a way of reminding us that we're not in charge. And maybe that's a good thing. When you carry fear, it weighs you down. It clouds your judgment, distorts your perspective, and drains your energy. You might be wondering, how do I let go when the fear feels so real, so constant? The truth is, fear isn't something you fight, it's something you surrender. And surrender isn't weakness, it's the strongest choice you can make. Because when you surrender your fears to God, you're placing them into the hands of someone who knows exactly what to do with them.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about this. What are you afraid of right now? Maybe it's something big, like losing your job, your health, or someone you love. Or maybe it's something smaller but no less significant, like not being enough, not measuring up, or not knowing what comes next. Whatever it is, ask yourself, what would happen if I trusted God with this completely? That's not a rhetorical question. What would happen if you stopped clinging to fear and started trusting that God has already seen the outcome? God isn't asking you to ignore your fears or pretend they don't exist. He's asking you to give them to Him. Why? Because He's the only one who can carry them without being crushed by them. He's the only one who can transform your fear into faith, your panic into peace. You might be thinking, that sounds great, but how do I actually do that? It starts with a choice, a deliberate decision to stop holding on so tightly. Surrendering your fears to God means saying, I don't have to control this. I don't have to have all the answers. I trust that you do. It's a simple idea, but it's one of the hardest things to live out. Why? Because surrender feels like loss when it's actually freedom. Imagine you're standing on a cliff, holding a backpack filled with every fear you've ever carried. It's heavy, isn't it? It's been weighing you down for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to stand tall. And then you hear God's voice, "Give it to me." Can you picture that moment? What does it take for you to hand it over? What's keeping you from doing it? God's invitation is clear. Cast all your cares on me, because I care for you. That's not just a comforting thought. It's a call to action. He's not asking you to solve your fears. He's asking you to trust Him with them. And when you do, something incredible happens. The weight lifts. The pressure eases. You begin to see your circumstances not as obstacles, but as opportunities for God to show up in ways you couldn't have imagined. Let me ask you something deeper. What do your fears say about what you believe? If fear is the belief that something bad will happen, then surrendering your fears to God is the ultimate act of faith. It's saying, I believe that you are good, even when life doesn't feel good. I believe that you are in control, even when everything feels out of control. I believe that you are enough, even when I feel like I'm not. fear wants to keep you small. It wants to keep you focused on the worst-case scenario. But faith invites you to see the bigger picture, to trust that even when things don't go the way you hoped, God is still working for your good. Can you see how surrendering your fears isn't just about letting go of anxiety? It's about stepping into a life that's bigger, freer, and more aligned with the purpose you were created for. Here's the thing about fear. It grows in the dark. The more you focus on it, the bigger it seems. But when you bring it into the light, when you name it, face it, and surrender it to God, it starts to lose its power. What fear have you been hiding? What would happen if you brought it into the light today? This isn't about ignoring reality. Surrendering your fears to God doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means trusting Him in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of the struggle. It means saying, I don't have to see the whole path to take the next step. God isn't asking you to walk this road alone. He's right there with you, holding you up when you feel weak, guiding you when you feel lost, and reminding you that His love is bigger than any fear you'll ever face. Do you believe that? If not, what would it take for you to start? Fear will always try to make itself heard, but it doesn't have to control you. Or you can surrender it to the one who knows exactly what to do with it. The question is, what will you choose? When you trust God with your fears, you're not just letting go, you're stepping into something greater. You're opening the door for peace, joy, and freedom to take their place. And that's not just a better way to live, it's the When you surrender your fears to God, something changes, not just around you, but within you. It's as if the chains that have been holding you back start to loosen. You realize fear doesn't have the final say in your life. It never did. And as you begin to release the grip fear has had on you, you start to notice the spaces it used to occupy filling with something else. Peace, courage, clarity. Fear thrives on control. It tells you that if you just hold on tightly enough, you can protect yourself from harm. But control is an illusion, isn't it? No matter how hard we try to plan, predict, or prepare, life doesn't always follow our scripts. And that's where surrender comes in. It's not about giving up. It's about giving over. It's about saying, God, I trust you to hold what I can't. Have you ever thought about what fear costs you? It's not just the sleepless nights or the constant tension in your body. Fear steals your focus. It pulls you away from the present moment, making you worry about things that might never happen, and in doing so, it robs you of joy. How much of your life has been spent in fear instead of freedom? That's not how it's meant to be. You were created for more. Surrendering fear to God isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice. Each day brings new challenges, new uncertainties, and new reasons for fear to creep back in. But with each surrender, you strengthen your trust in God. It's like building a muscle. Every time you choose trust over fear, you grow stronger. There's this beautiful shift that happens when you let go of fear. You stop living reactively, waiting for the next bad thing to happen, and you start living expectantly, watching for the ways God is going to move. Fear makes you brace yourself for impact. Faith makes you open yourself to possibility. Think about the things you've been afraid of. Maybe it's failure, rejection, or the unknown. What if those very things are the doorway to something greater? He can use them all to grow you, shape you, and lead you into a deeper understanding of who He is and who you are in Him. But here's the thing, surrender requires trust, and trust requires knowing who you're trusting. That's why it's so important to remind yourself of who God is. He's not distant or detached. He's present, personal, and invested in your life. He sees what you can't see, knows what you don't know, and loves you more than you can comprehend. When you hold that truth close, surrender becomes less about giving up and more about leaning in. Fear tells you that the worst will happen, but God tells you that even in the worst, He is with you. Fear says you're alone, but God says He will never leave you. Fear focuses on what you can lose, but God focuses on what you can gain. Which voice are you going to listen to? It's easy to think that surrendering fear means everything will suddenly get better, but surrender isn't about avoiding challenges, it's about changing how you face them. Life will still have its storms, but when you trust God, you face them differently. You face them knowing you're not alone, knowing the storm doesn't define you, and knowing it won't last forever. Here's something to think about. What if fear isn't just something to overcome, but something to learn from? Fear can reveal where you're relying on yourself instead of God. It can show you the areas where you need to grow, the places where trust is still a work in progress. When you see fear this way, it stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. But don't stop there. Fear isn't a destination, it's a crossroads. It's the place where you get to decide, will I stay stuck or will I step forward? Fear says, what if I failed? Faith says, what if this is the moment everything changes? Fear says, what if I'm not enough? Faith says, what if God's strength is made perfect in my weakness? When you surrender your fears, you make space for something better. You make space for hope, hope that the future holds good things, even if you can't see them yet. Hope that you're not defined by your past or limited by your fears. Hope that God is always at work, even in the messiest parts of your life. You don't have to be fearless to surrender your fears. You just have to be willing. Willing to let go of control, willing to trust, willing to believe that God's plans for you are good, even when they're hard to see. What's one fear you can surrender today? It doesn't have to be all of them, just one. Start small and watch what happens. When you let go of fear, you're not just giving something up, you're gaining something far greater. You're stepping into a life marked by peace, purpose, and the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing you're held by a God who never lets go. When fear no longer holds you, life looks completely different. You start to move through the world with a kind of freedom that can't be explained. It's not that problems vanish, but they stop controlling you. Fear loses its grip, and in its place, trust begins to grow. Trust in God doesn't just change how you see your challenges, it changes how you live your life. Freedom in God starts with knowing who you are and whose you are. When you trust God, you're reminded that you're not defined by your fears, your failures, or even your successes. When you're defined by the love of a God who created you with a purpose, who sees your worth, and who works all things together for your good. That's the foundation. That's the truth you build your life. So often we live our lives reacting to fear. We avoid risks, settle for less, or play it safe because we're afraid of what might go wrong. But when you trust God, you begin to shift. Instead of focusing on what might go wrong, you start to see what might go right. Instead of being ruled by the fear of failure, You start to move with the courage that comes from knowing God's plans are bigger than any mistake you could make. Think about what happens when you finally let go of something that's been weighing you down. It's like taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. That's what surrendering fear feels like. There's a release, a relief, and an openness to what comes next. Have you experienced that before, the feeling of stepping into freedom after years of being held back? If you have, you know how life-changing it can be. And if you haven't, it's closer than you think. Trust isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice you make every single day. It's deciding to live differently because you know God is in control. You stop bracing yourself for the worst and start expecting the best, not because life is perfect, but because God is faithful. You begin to live with open hands, willing to receive whatever He has for you because you know it's better than anything you could create on your own. What does living in trust look like? It looks like taking the risk you've been avoiding because you know God will guide you. It looks like forgiving someone who hurt you because you trust God to heal what's broken. It looks like stepping out of your comfort zone because you believe His plans are greater than your fears. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Freedom in God isn't just about you. When you trust Him, the people around you start to notice. They see the peace in your life, the confidence in your steps, and the way you handle challenges with grace. Trust is contagious. Your freedom inspires others to seek their own. What kind of impact could you have on the people around you if you lived fully in the freedom God offers? Life with God doesn't mean there won't be hard times. It means those hard times don't define you. It means you can walk through the storm, knowing it won't last forever, knowing you're not alone, knowing there's a purpose in it. Even in the darkest moments, there's light ahead, because God is leading you there. Fear wants to keep you looking backward or worrying about the future. Trust keeps you grounded in the present. It lets you focus on what God is doing right now, and when you stay present, you begin to notice the ways He's moving in your life, the blessings you've overlooked, the prayers He's answered, the opportunities He's placed before you. Have you ever stopped to think about what fear has stolen from you, the moments of joy you missed, the opportunities you didn't take? The connections you held back from because you were too afraid? When you trust God, you start taking those moments back. You step into life fully, without holding back, because you know you're supported by something greater than yourself. Trust changes the way you dream. Fear makes you dream small, keeping your goals safe and manageable. Trust makes you dream big, knowing that God's plans for you are bigger than anything you could imagine. What's one dream you've been holding back because of fear? What would happen if you trusted God enough to pursue it? Living in trust doesn't mean you won't face challenges, but it means those challenges won't define you. When you trust God, you approach life with a different mindset. You see setbacks as setups for something greater. You see delays as opportunities to grow. You see challenges as moments for God to show His power. The freedom that comes from trusting God isn't just about feeling better, it's about living better. It's about stepping into the life you were created for, a life of purpose, joy, and peace. It's about walking through life with the confidence that comes from knowing you're not walking alone. What would your life look like if fear didn't have the final say? If you trusted God completely with your relationships, your career, your future, and even your failures, that's the kind of life God is inviting you into. a life of freedom, of trust, and of unshakable confidence in His goodness. Fear will always try to creep back in, but it doesn't have to win. Every time you feel it rising, you have a choice. You can let it take over, or you can surrender it to God. Every time you choose trust, you're taking another step into freedom, and the more steps you take, the more your life changes. God doesn't promise that life will be easy, but He does promise that He will be with you. He promises to guide you, to strengthen you, and to work all things for your good. Trusting Him doesn't just change how you face fear, it changes everything about the way you live. Fear may be loud, but it's not stronger than God's love. And when you surrender your fears to Him, you open the door to a life that's fuller, freer, and more beautiful than you ever thought possible. That's the life He wants for you. That's the life you were made for.